point that I want to make with this is that the drop off in trust in higher education, the drop off in trust in the sciences, of scientists rather, who many of them are at universities. So I do wonder if there's a corollary there, and I just haven't seen anybody do that research either. So again, this is more. Well, I, like many of you, saw the hearing on Capitol Hill in front of Congress with the presidents of Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, discussing issues on campus related to anti-Semitism and protests there. Now, I want to say at the outset, this is not going to be a video about the specific issues with Israel and the Hamas and the war against Hamas or anything like that. It's not going to be about that, because I think there's something else that's been somewhat ignored. And this is one of the articles I'm going to bring up with that. It actually came out before the hearing, but I think has a distinct amount of relevance here. And why do I want to bring this up in this channel that's ostensibly a bit about science? Well, one of the reasons I pay so close attention to things going on at universities and the like is because that is where we train the next generation of scientists. So whatever's going on at the universities currently becomes actually quite important. And I'll get back to the hearing in a minute, but I did a video last week that was about the drop in trust in scientists, and I believe it's also, and I've done videos before about the drop in trust in higher education in the United States too, and it has not been just from one side of the political spectrum. It's been from quite both in this case, but I want to get into that, and I'm going to link a couple of different articles together, so this may be a little bit longer of a video than normal, but I think it's a very important conversation to have. Now, you've probably noticed by now the hat on my head. With that, this is the last week of content from this channel before I take a break for Christmas and New Year's. So I want to wish you all a early Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. There'll be one more video this week, but after that I will be away on my holiday break. So an early Merry Christmas to you all, hence the Santa hat involved here. And so, oh yes, before I forget, I know a few folks have reached out to me and asked if I would do anything on the recent article on censorship in science. And as I said on Twitter, we're going to record a Rogue Journal Club on that. That will probably come out while I am away. Either that or early in the new year. We haven't quite decided when, but it is coming. Now, to the point here. This comes from, this article here comes from Wall Street Journal. It's an opinion column from Jukka Savolainen, which I apologize, Jukka. I don't know 100% how to pronounce your name. So if I pronounce it wrong, please feel free to correct me. Florida's shunning of sociology should be a wake-up call. The field has morphed from scientific study into academic advocacy for left-wing causes. The Sunshine State is giving sociology the cold shoulder. The Florida Board of Governors Academic and Student Affairs Committee on November 9th voted to remove principles of sociology from the list of courses the state's public college students can take to fulfill their general education requirement. Education Commissioner Manny Diaz Jr. introduced the proposal. Like Governor Ron DeSantis, Mr. Diaz is a conservative politician concerned about left-wing bias in higher education. The board will take a final vote in January. The American Sociological Association strongly objects. But as a sociology professor, Jukka is a sociology professor in this, with extensive experience teaching general education courses, I sympathize with the decision. I have taught undergraduate sociology courses since 1996. Through the decades, I have watched my discipline morph from a scientific study of social reality into academic advocacy for left-wing causes. Dozens of my fellow sociologists have also observed the transformation, including Christian Smith of Notre Dame, whose book, The Sacred Project of American Sociology in 2014, provides a brutally honest account of our troubled discipline. Mr. Smith is disappointed that undergraduate sociology textbooks, rather than disseminate scientific findings, quote, function as a recruiting tool and resocialization manuals, end quote, to turn students into radical activists. He is equally disappointed with the discipline's failure to come clean about its obvious political commitments. Publicly, the American Sociological Association describes sociology as a scientific study of social life, interested in the causes and consequences of human behavior. Internally, ASA, American Sociological Association, embraces and promotes social change activism. Each year, the association's president chooses a theme for its annual meeting. This is true of a lot of conferences. You can actually learn a lot about how things have changed within a professional society if you watch the themes of meetings over years, because from when they started doing themes at their annual meetings, you'll see how they change and morph over the years. Next year's theme is brazenly political, quote, intersectional solidarities, building communities of hope, justice, and joy. The ASA sums it up as follows, quote, the 2024 theme emphasizes sociology as a form of liberatory praxis, an effort to not only understand social inequities, but also to intervene in socio-political struggles. And to put a point on it, that is a blatantly political statement. You have to make a whole lot of assumptions from a singular political perspective for you to be part of that statement. In 2020, I started teaching a general education course on the sociology of sports. Having never taught the subject before, I relied on a popular textbook. It didn't take me long to discover the book provided few interesting findings or persuasive arguments. Instead, it was peppered with tendinacious grievances against capitalism, masculinity, and white privilege. When I taught the course again, I ditched the text and relied on a heterodox mix of material drawn from commentaries and the social sciences. When covering gender issues, I've introduced students to insights from evolutionary psychology to explain sex differences in athletic ability and interest. I've also explained Title IX's positive influence on athletic participation among women and girls. When I've covered race, I've given a fair shake to Colin Kaepernick's activism and the National Basketball Association's embrace of the Black Lives Matter movement. But I also assign work by contrarian Black authors, such as Coleman Hughes, who have questioned with credible evidence popular claims about racial disparities in police violence. This course has become a roaring success. Enrollment has grown from fewer than 20 students to 90, which is quite impressive. It is one of the most popular social science courses in my university's general studies core. My students discuss challenging topics respectfully and with open minds. Many end up on the left, where they started, but even conservative students are comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial topics. This is the way forward for academic sociology. Instead of defending the ideologically corrupt status quo, we should listen to critics inside and outside the discipline. We should view the Florida decision as a wake-up call and an invitation to introspection. If this formerly exciting field of inquiry is to have a future, we must return to its roots. This will demand a collective commitment to impartial research and teaching. This shouldn't be too much to ask. After all, it was a sociologist, Robert K. Merton, 1910 to 2003, who formulated the enduring norms of science, which included organized skepticism and disinterestedness. So, Mr. Savolainen is a professor of sociology at Wayne State University. So, that is the point that I was actually trying to make a fair bit last week. When I, actually, this article came out last week and I just didn't get the chance. But anyway, that was the point that I was trying to make a lot of last week. In that, disciplines that embrace huge amounts of activism and go in one particular political direction over another, when they are meant to be doing truth-seeking, and scholarship is meant to be, and as science in particular is meant to be as a pursuit of the truth, what happens is a distrust that leads to the things like what Florida is doing. And while I recoil, as many academics do, and I use that word loosely as applied to myself because I don't necessarily consider myself in line with other academics given some of my leanings and thinking, but when you have that situation where you have become so obviously politicized that people can observe it and see it so clearly, that you as a discipline have gone in one complete direction and have no viewpoint diversity involved, then it engenders a lack of trust. And that's actually where I come back to the hearing, because the purpose of the universities, I agree with actually Jonathan Haidt's take from early on in Heterodox Academy's life. I've covered it on this channel, but he talked about it in terms of the universities have one telos. They can have one ultimate purpose. They cannot do more than one, because if you have more than one, you're ultimately going to have to pick one. You're going to be in a situation where you have to pick one. So it's truth or social justice. And he describes, of course, the telos of the universities is the pursuit of the truth. And you cannot do that without a commitment to viewpoint diversity and free speech. And that's actually where I come back to this. Now many of you have seen the news at this point of the resignation of Liz McGill, now, soon to be former president of the University of Pennsylvania, following the hearings related to anti-Semitism. And she was there alongside Claudine Gay, president of Harvard. Whole other bits of news about that. I'm not going to get to that now. But MIT president Sally Kornbluth was also there. And, it's very interesting. Here's a piece from Heather McDonald, and I think it highlights the other point that I want to make with this. Liz McGill was forced to resign Saturday as president of the University of Pennsylvania, by all indications because, at a congressional hearing, she could not bring herself to declare that calls for genocide of Jews are punishable speech. She would more justly have lost her job for being a bald-faced hypocrite when it comes to campus-free expression. The future of higher education depends on which of these motives governs such decisions in the future. Now, I'm not going to go rehash because this is basically a transcript from the hearing. I'm just looking for the actual section of this article to make my point in here in what Heather McDonald was saying, because there's parts that disappear that I don't think are relevant to what I'm trying to say, and now I can't find it. Where is it? Yes, there we go. Yes. Okay, here it is. The president's refusal to declare hypothetical calls for the genocide of Jews punishable conduct has been portrayed as the greatest scandal of the hearing. It was not. The real scandal was the president's duplicity in citing a commitment to free expression as the reason why they needed to, quote, give a wide berth to views that are objectionable, as Gay put it. GOP congressmen demolished the president's protestations of free speech loyalty, providing example after example of faculty members and outside speakers who had been muzzled, punished, or banned because of views contrary to campus orthodoxy. Those views included the assertion that sex is biological and binary, that racial preferences harm their beneficiaries, that the diversity bureaucracy inhibits academic freedom, and that an open borders immigration policy damages the country. It was those fantastically counterfactual assertions of loyalty to academic freedom that should have doomed McGill and the other two presidents. On any common understanding of truthfulness, their claims to protect objectionable views were flagrantly contrary to the facts. Having been exposed as hypocrites, dissemblers, and enforcers of politically correct thinking, they should have all been fired as unfit to lead institutions ostensibly dedicated to the pursuit of the truth and the transmission of knowledge. So, this is the point that Heather McDonald is taking, and this is the reason I actually have problems with all three of those presidents myself. Now, understanding the calls that have been made on campus, this will be the one time I address it, the calls that have been made on campus related to any of the genocidal things, and particularly any calls for genocide of a people, and in this case, calls on campus that have happened for the genocide of Jewish people, is abhorrent. Full stop on that one. It's the only thing I'm going to need to say about that. But that is what should have done. What Heather McDonald is talking about here is what is far more of concern to me, because all three of those universities have been horrific when it comes to free expression on campus, and have indeed been hypocritical. They have not defended it when it has gone against their views before. And it was the one time that they did some sort of weird half-hearted defense during the hearing. And actually, I want to get in here and show you this. This is actually from Harvard, from the 2024 College Free Speech Rankings from College Pulse and Fire. And as is highlighted many times over, as is highlighted many times over, Fire ranks dead last. It is the worst university in the country for free expression. And as written by Student Voices, I avoid posting anything on social media tied to my name because I'm afraid they might be misconstrued by my classmates or admin. Every time we were instructed to introduce ourselves by stating our pronouns, and that comes from a particular political bias. Despite having friends and a strong social support network on campus, I felt very alone. I am a moderate Republican, and even opinions that I possess that are moderate or even left-leaning on the national scale seem relatively unacceptable among the student body. It is an incredibly difficult and isolating political landscape to navigate for someone who is not left-wing. I felt uncomfortable speaking about the immorality of abortion. Anything that would fall in the realm of cancelable opinions, I would feel substantial pause about expressing. My meritocracy class, where any objection to affirmative action was off limits unofficially in section, I'm pro, but it is a very controversial topic and should be questioned like all other policies. That student, good on you. That student, good on you. I have a lot of respect for a student that you might have been pro it, but you're at least game to debate it. I try to avoid telling people that I support Israel or that is where I'm going this summer. I'm just saying I'm going abroad because I don't want to be judged. Political views, certain views are frowned upon by another political group, therefore they'll try to judge you or cancel you. My views on cancel culture are not popular. I'm pro-Palestine, but I fear that whenever I express that sentiment, I get labeled anti-Semitic. Oh, brother. But Harvard is the single worst one, and has had its moments of sanctioning scholars many times over, from 2019 to 2023, which is the length of the survey as it exists currently. But you can keep on going with this, and that's actually what I'm going to do here live. UPenn. Oh, hold on. Close filters. There it is. University of Pennsylvania. Now, to remind folks, there's 257 colleges in this particular ranking. This one is ranked number 247 here. So again, Penn is damn near the bottom. I'd be worried the professor would try to question my intelligence or that I'm not well-formed enough in a topic. I never want to seem ungrateful of the opportunity to attend Penn, so I'm wary of expressing criticisms. I've taken few political classes and I'm worried for my grade. In a writing seminar, I disagreed with the notion that private property is a burden on humanity and that makes people slaves to capitalism. So somebody was defending capitalism. Yeah, there's a lot of tough things there. And the other one, of course, MIT. Close filters. There it is. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And you notice this one's actually gone up. There was a little green arrow next to it. Been a repeat in the survey, and they've actually gone up. Why? Because MIT was the school that canceled Dorian Abbott's lecture. Why? Because he disagrees about DEI. It was a climate science speech. He was canceled for saying he disagreed with DEI from giving a lecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Oh gosh almighty. And so MIT's actually gone up because after that whole kerfuffle with Dorian Abbott, you actually had a lot of folks in MIT push back and realize that they had a serious problem with actual free speech on campus. And so they took some actions to fix it, and it reflected in the change in rankings over the years. Now, MIT has still got a long way to go, as many universities do, but it is a point to be made that there has actually been some improvements. But the larger point still remains. All three of these universities, and to to my mind, many other universities, have been somewhat hypocritical in that they will gladly defend certain things as free speech, but not necessarily others. Um, and this is an interesting thing to deal with, because that is one of the reasons where the trust issue comes from with higher education, I think. Now, I say the reason I say I think is because right now I'm somewhat speculating. There's actually not a whole lot of great literature that I could find that talks about why the trust in higher education and the trust in scientists at large, I talked about this last week, has dropped. I speculate in that it is quite significantly in part because of the degree of activism that is happening on campuses and that is becoming more visible. Now, I will also preface this in that it's not necessarily unreasonable to say that there are some bits of elements there that just generally don't like both things and are trying to smear them in whatever ways you can. That is not unheard of. Those professors that are arguing that, I don't think they're entirely wrong that there is that element that exists. But as Juka said, the thing about it is there needs to be introspection with this as to what's going wrong, not just in sociology, but actually in many different disciplines. And I think that will get at the issue of trust and why trust in science, in trust in higher education has been decreasing quite a bit, somewhat. And it's interesting to see that I'm not the only one who observes this, that the devotion to pursuing the truth as a university, or as a scientific disciplines, as is the case with sociology here, needs to be the focus and not the activism, political activism that's been done in universities. And surprisingly, I never thought in my life I would end up agreeing with Fareed Zakaria on CNN, who made the point on his show on Sunday.
Here's my take. When one thinks of America's greatest strengths, the kind of assets the world looks at with admiration and envy, America's elite universities would long have been at the top of that list.
He is actually correct. Because you can see this actually reflected in the trust data around higher education and universities. You can actually see how it used to be much better. And you thought all sorts of great things about universities and what have you. Not so much anymore.
But the American public has been losing faith in these universities for good reason.
True statement.
3 university presidents came under fire this week for their vague and indecisive answers when asked whether calling for the genocide of Jews would violate their institution's codes of conduct. But to understand their performance, we have to understand the broad shift that has taken place at elite universities, which have gone from being centers of excellence to institutions pushing political agendas.
Now, for those, much of you watching this channel may not take much faith in CNN, but I will give Fareed his due with this one, because it is an agreement, and I think this is where I will have to critique, because this is where sociologists and scientists and psychologists need to be doing their due diligence with this, in that there's polling to show the trust has dropped. Most definitely there is. It's quite undeniable at this point. There's actually very little that gives us a good sense of why that's the case and what can we do in terms of peer-reviewed literature. I'm not saying not anecdotal stuff. I'm not saying things like Juka or what Heather McDonald has said, or any such things as that, or the college free speech rankings or anything like that, where you can get from the students and you can see, oh, I'm scared of this happening. I'm scared of this happening. The question of why in the public's eye trust in science, as well as trust in scientists, not trust in science, but trust in scientists and trust in higher education has dropped, is still an open question of the exact reason why. And there needs to be some literature research about that.
People sense the transformation. As Paul Tuff has pointed out, the share of young adults.
By the way, for those of you after the fact, I had to edit it because I accidentally hit full screen and it ended up doing something weird. Sorry, I had to edit that part out where I accidentally hit the full screen button.
who said a college degree was very important, fell from 74% in 2013 to just 41% in 2019. In 2018, 61% of those polled said higher education was headed in the wrong direction, and only 38% felt it was on the right track. In 2016,
you get a bunch of that from Pew. He's mixing a bunch of different polls together, but some of that came from Pew, and you go dive into those polls a little bit more, and it actually gets more concerning.
70% of America's high school graduates were headed for college. Now that number is 62%.
That's still a majority, by the way. That is still a majority, but precipitous drop off nonetheless.
Souring on higher education makes America an outlier among all advanced nations. American universities have been neglecting a core focus on excellence in order to pursue a variety of agendas, many of them clustered around diversity and inclusion.
Indeed. I have said this before, and I do believe it, that DEI is antithetical to scientific practice. I am not the only one to say this. I will highlight this briefly. This is a long tweet, as it were here, but it is one of the things that that Bill Ackman highlights. He has been a longtime donor to Harvard, and he's just, or at least is my understanding, he's been a longtime donor. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, he's got things here. So he's an alumni of Harvard, at least. But he talks about the notion here that the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging is a major contributing source of discriminatory practices on campus and highly damaging to the culture and sense of community at Harvard. It's beyond repair and should be shut down. I do not mean to suggest whatsoever that the goal of a diverse university that is welcoming for all students should be abandoned. I do not agree. I entirely agree with that sentiment. It is not a bad thing to strive for. I'm going to be perfectly clear about that. It is not a bad thing to strive for, but the way DEI is, ain't going to get you there, I don't think.
It started with the best of intentions. Colleges wanted to make sure young people of all backgrounds had access to higher education and felt comfortable on campus. But those good intentions have morphed into a dogmatic ideology and turned these universities into places where the pervasive goals are political and social engineering, not academic merit. As the evidence produced for the recent Supreme Court case on affirmative action showed, universities have systematically downplayed merit-based criteria for admissions in favor of racial quotas. Some universities' response to this ruling seems to be that they will go further down this path, eliminating the requirement for any standardized tests like the SAT. That move would allow them to then take students with little reference to objective criteria. Of course, those who would suffer most would be bright students from poor backgrounds who normally use tests like the SAT to demonstrate their qualifications. In the humanities, hiring for new academic positions now appears to center on the race and gender of the applicant, as well as the subject matter, which needs to be about marginalized groups. A white man studying the American presidency does not have a prayer of getting tenure at a major history department in America today. Grade inflation in the humanities is rampant. At Yale, the median grade is now an A.
The median grade should never be an A, to be honest with that. That just, oh my gosh.
New subjects crop up that are really political agendas, not academic fields. You can now major in diversity.
You're majoring in politicized BS, essentially.
Equity and inclusion at some colleges. The ever-growing bureaucracy devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion naturally recommends that more time and energy be spent on these issues. The most obvious lack of diversity at universities, political diversity, which clearly affects their ability to analyze many issues, is never addressed.
He's very right. He's very, very right. That's why it's just like, I never thought I would find myself in agreement with Fareed Zakaria at this. I don't know what his solution would be to this. We may not agree on that, but universities are not necessarily the most... there's not necessarily the most tolerant for divergent speech.
Showing that these goals are...
And I'm not saying that from my own perspective. I'm actually saying that from the surveys, like the FIRE survey. Here, the college free speech rankings, that's where it's shown quite a bit, along with other surveys. I mean, the data is there now.
Not centrally related to achieving or sustaining or building excellence. Out of this culture of diversity has grown the collection of ideas and practices that we have now all heard of: safe spaces, trigger warnings, microaggressions. As the authors Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have discussed, many of these colleges have instituted speech codes that make it a violation of university rules to say things that some groups might find offensive. Universities advise students not to speak, act, even dress in ways that might cause offense to some minority.
That might cause offense. Keep that in mind. Might cause offense. Talked about this actually with Anna Krylov pointing this out as being a thing with the Royal Society of Chemistry, of all places, putting that into a journal, or Nature Human Behavior, putting that out there as potential editorial guidelines. Might cause offense. How are you going to know what cause offense? You have to remove just everything if it might cause offense.
Minority groups. With this culture of virtue signaling growing, the George Floyd protests erupted.
I disagree with the Chiron here. Are going awry? No. They have gone awry.
And many universities latched on and issued statements effectively aligning their institutions with these protests. By my memory, few took such steps even after 9/11 or during the Iraq War. In this context, it is understandable that Jewish groups would wonder, why do safe spaces, microaggressions, and hate speech not apply to us? If universities can take positions against free speech to make some groups feel safe, why not us? Having coddled so many student groups for so long, university administrators found themselves squirming, unable to explain why certain groups, Jews, Asians, don't seem to count in these conversations. Having gone so far down the ideological path, these universities and these presidents could not make the case clearly that at the center of a university is the free expression of ideas, and that while harassment and intimidation would not be tolerated, offensive speech would and should be protected.
So yeah, I mean, he is not wrong. As much as the speech that comes out is disgusting and vile, where there is case law to say that it violates the First Amendment is if it's in direct incitement to violence, direct calls for violence. Yeah, that does violate. But if it just offends you, you can be offended, but ain't much for it.
As CNN's Van Jones has eloquently said, the point of college is to keep you physically safe, but intellectually unsafe, to force you to confront ideas that you vehemently disagree with. What we saw in the House hearing this week was the inevitable result of decades of the politicization of universities. America's top colleges are no longer seen as bastions of excellence, but partisan outfits, which means they will keep getting buffeted by these political storms as they emerge. They should abandon this long misadventure into politics, retrain their gaze on their core strengths, and rebuild their reputations as centers of research and learning.
So like I said, I actually quite vehemently agree on a number of things in there with Fareed Zakaria. Never thought I would. But the point here that I want to make in all of this with this video is quite simply, where is the drop in trust coming from? And Fareed's take is similar to mine, that the drop in trust is coming from the fact that, congratulations, you've gone in such a politicized direction, you've alienated people, particularly in the social sciences, as you talk about the ratio of left to right ideologies in the social sciences is almost non-existent because there's so few. in one particular group, and the diversity of thought and fostering that and being inclusive of that has been ignored, or as I have said it before, inadvertently uniformist in thought and exclusive of anybody who disagrees, is the way universities have tended to go. Now, is this true of all? No, it is not. There are some universities that actually have done decently well with striking that balance, and Juka's example in his article is a good example of that. Finding a class where you can actually have that kind of butting heads disagreement on things, and have it still go well. Perfect, fabulous kind of thing. So that's the point that I want to make with this, is that the drop off in trust in higher education, the drop off in trust in the sciences, of scientists rather, who many of them are at universities. So I do wonder if there's a corollary there, and I just haven't seen anybody do that research either. So again, this is more speculative on my part, and I would suggest some more research be involved in this. But a drop off in trust because of being so explicitly political while trying to claim being not so, essentially. And in that way, ending up abandoning the mission that is tasked to you. As a scientist, your job is the pursuit of the truth. As a university, your job is the pursuit of the truth. Nothing else. And you can't do that necessarily unless you actually have divergent viewpoints involved in here, and a respect and inclusion of divergent viewpoints, which is quite different from what you find increasingly on campuses of late. Lots of speculation on my part with this, but I do agree with Juka's commentary. And he wrote that before the hearing, before the hearing came out. But I would not be surprised to see more of these kinds of hearings. I would not be surprised to see more of these kinds of interactions with different governmental agencies, because there has been a loss of trust, and has been a loss of trust, at least I think, in part because of abandoning the core mission that you have as a scientist, or the core mission you have as a university, pursuing the truth, being centers of research and learning if you're at a university, but abandoning it in favor of becoming activists. That causes a collapse of trust. And it's no surprise to see different state actors react when that is observed. And I think such things, such as what was in Congress, such as commentary in Florida, should be a call for introspection. Whether or not that's taken up, we shall see. I certainly hope so, though, because I want to see better. I want to see more and better. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Merry Christmas, and stay curious.